you have to look at the why. Like, why would you stay at work till 10, 12 o'clock? Why would you fly that? If it's doing something that's going to help your family, help your goal as a human being, why not? We all have those little dark corners in our mind where we don't want to look. And the challenge is we know we need to look into those dark corners. And it doesn't mean that there's bad stuff in there. There's just stuff that we're avoiding.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, the world's biggest B2B sales show, where we help you not just hit your sales target, but really thrive in sales. Let's meet today's guest.
Okay, hi, Will. I'm Michael Veltri, leadership keynote speaker, teaching successful professionals how to make better decisions in business and life.
On this episode with Michael, he shares how we can become a higher performer in sales without being burnt out, without being sleep deprived, without going bald, without being just a terrible mess, how we can have the success without all the negative side of it. So with that said, let's jump right in. Is it possible for the audience, and myself included, to become a high performer? And we'll touch on what that consists of in a second, but to become a high performer without being burnt out or falling out, being bright red faced, being sleep deprived? Is it possible to perform at that high level without all these kind of negative things surrounding it?
Yeah, it absolutely is, Will. And, we learn by doing. And I had become successfully miserable where I didn't have, I don't want to say work-life balance, right? I like to think of it as work-life integration. Because if you're integrating, if you're doing something you're passionate about and you have proper support structures, then you can find that integration. And I know for me, Will, I built a business doing something I was passionate. I love to do martial arts. I loved it. It became, I was burned out. It was a burden. I wasn't passionate about it. I didn't have the support structures. But absolutely, these sales professionals can absolutely perform at a super high level with integration without getting burned out. So I think that's a key phrase. We integrate it versus trying to balance. If I take a little bit of this, because right, with leverage, if I have balance, it's gonna just take a little something to take it off balance. So let's think about it integrated. That's how I think it might be a nice way for your audience to think about it.
And I want to touch on the integration in a second, but just on this first point, why is it seemingly then, if we don't have to have all these negative effects to have the positive, why is it almost celebrated when people stay late at work in the office and the last one out, or they fly on the weekends and rather than fly during the week, and they're doing all these extra bits and pieces? Why is all that celebrated, even if it's perhaps not improving the on the record performance as a salesperson?
It's a good question. I think if I want to take it up a little higher, you have to look at the why. Like, why would you stay at work till 10, 12 o'clock? Why would you fly that? If it's doing something that's going to help your family, help your goal as a human being, why not? It's not to say that, you're there. I would say if you're working every night till 10, 11 p.m. every single night, we might want to take a closer look at that. But I think people need to get clear on why they're doing what they're doing. And I know for me, when I had become successfully miserable, and I love business development, right? I was doing all of these actions for the wrong reason. I didn't look closer at my why. So I think a better way to say that is, why are you doing what you're doing? And if you're really honest with yourself and look at it, do I need to be here? Do I need to put in these hours? Is it producing the results I want? That will help your people look to see where they can adjust their time and energy and focus to produce the results they want.
Cool. Coming back onto integration for a second, because I've not really heard that term used in this way. If work-life balance is, and this is obviously different for everyone, whether it exists or not, we can touch on that. But if work-life balance in the perfect world is we get to work at 9, we perhaps leave at 3 or 4 because we've crushed it, we've closed that huge deal for the day, and then we spend time with our family, our fish, or dog, or whatever martial arts. We're going off to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments on the evening, and that's the balance. And that we can put that on a diary, and that's understandable. What does work-life integration look like? And I guess what does that look like on a diary, on Google Calendar?
Sure. So one thing that I think will help any sales profession, right, is that there's two conversations going on at any one time. That's why I'm actually glad we're doing this over video. So right now there's the verbal, what's coming out of my mouth, and the nonverbal. Even on video, my facial expressions, and I know you can't see it, but my hands are moving. So there's the nonverbal. And if a sales professional, if anybody, isn't truly passionate or authentic about what they're doing. For example, I was very successful in corporate America selling way back in the day before cell phones were out, two-way pagers. I don't know if people remember two-way pagers, a precursor to then cell phones, but I wasn't passionate about it, Will. And so no matter how hard I worked or applied myself, I couldn't really find the balance, let alone integration. So what I talk about and what you said there about, closing a big deal so you can have that time. If you're doing something that you're truly passionate about, first of all, whoever you're selling to is going to know that. If you're just trying to sell something to make a buck, or you're not truly behind it, they're going to feel that, the verbal and nonverbal. But if you're truly passionate about the product or service you're selling, then I think it's easy to integrate that where, if you need to jump on a sales call at 6 p.m., you're passionate about it, you could create the time to do that where it doesn't take away from your family. I've got a 4-year-old daughter. I'm a single parent. So, I've got to find that time doing something I'm passionate about, and I create the time. So it might be different, right? At any given day. And again, that's where the integration happens. Truly being passionate about it, you'll be able to integrate it where it's not a burden. And I know for me, I had reached this level of performance and burned out because I wasn't passionate about what I was doing anymore. So hopefully that makes a little more sense about the question.
It makes sense, and is perhaps another way to describe it then that there's blurred lines. There's not a firm boundary here of, for example, what time is it here now? It's 6:15 here in the UK, and I'm recording with yourself. I've got another recording after that, and then I'm going to sit in front of a computer until, unfortunately, you described this as perhaps not the best way to go about it, but I will literally sit in front of a computer till 10 o'clock tonight working because we've got a project that launches in 3 or 4 days' time. And I don't feel bad, burdened. I don't feel like I have to do it. It's almost natural. I wouldn't say I enjoy these conversations, but I wouldn't say I'm going to enjoy sitting in front of a computer for 3 or 4 hours after this. But it'll happen and it'll be seamless. It'll be almost that flow state. And then I'll go to bed, I'll be tired, and I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll go, shit, I had a pretty good day yesterday when I look down my checklist of things to do. So is that perhaps another way of describing it?
Totally, Will. That's a great analogy. It's absolutely a great analogy. And as a keynote speaker, I travel often, and I have control over that. First of all, I love to travel, like going to airports and stuff. Like, and if I didn't love to do that, I might not be in the right vocation. And maybe that's another word for audience members to play with is a vocation is something different than a job. Like I can only imagine all of the millions of people and lives you're impacting through this podcast. What you're doing, dude, that's a vocation, right? Like it's not just a job, it's a vocation you're touching on. So yes, something that adds fuel to our personal life, right? That doesn't detract from our energy to be the best spouse or best father or best brother or best son, best friend, etc. So being in that vocation, working the hours you want to work, and that it adds to your personal life.
How do we then take someone, and I disliked my last sales role. It was, I earned good money, but there's a lot of pressure coming from the top down. I didn't really fit the company culture. The company culture was they hired basically ex-athletes, and I'm this lanky, skinny dude who's doing well with the numbers, but again, not really. I just didn't really fit in, and that's fine. It's not a problem. And they hired me from the biggest competitor, so there was numerous reasons why I was in there. And really, I got on with the national sales manager and the high-level leadership of the organization much more so than the sales reps around me and my direct kind of sales managers. So I did well. Wasn't kind of the top of the leaderboard, but was plodding along. And this is when the podcast came about because I was like, oh, right, I need to improve my game. I need to make a change. And there was just no content for sales professionals at that time. And hopefully we're still at the kind of the forefront of the content for salespeople by salespeople on that front as well, as we kind of move in 2018 towards 2019 here. But I was just plodding. The word I'm using is, and the word that keeps coming to mind is I was plodding along. how do I go from plodding along to passionate? I feel like there's almost a book there. How do I go from plod to passion?
So, is it Simon Sinek, right? He wrote the book, Why? Or something like that. Okay. I love that. Asking yourself, why? Why do I do what I do? Perhaps for some people, it doesn't matter what product or service they're selling. They're passionate about producing a level of income that they can provide for their family, or in addition to their family, they donate X amount to charity, things like that. They're passionate about that. So I think what it boils down to is people, once they reach the point of suffering, right, where they don't want to make a change, where they have to make a change, like it's a must. And we all reach that in certain times in our lives. And once you bump up against that fringe where it's so painful, where you're so frustrated, you're not producing the results you want professionally, and maybe it's impacting your personal life, you're miserable, then you look and realize, hey, what I'm doing here isn't working. I'm not passionate about that. Hopefully people don't come to that. Listening to this podcast is one way for people to reflect and say, hey, I'm making decent money, but I hate my job. I need to make a change. So, I would recommend educate yourself as much as you possible. I think it was, there's another great quote, maybe Jim Rohn or somebody that says, leaders are readers. Always filling your mind with new ideas, right? And maybe things we talk about today might not be revolutionary, Will, but maybe a listener or a couple hundred or a couple thousand hear it a different way, have me describe it a different way, and it clicks. And they're like, and they say, yeah, you know what? Why am I doing this? I don't really like what I'm doing. Let me find something like. So, educate yourself, and eventually, if you're not passionate, it's going to come to the forefront. It's going to sniff out whether it's a pain thing or something's going to happen to force you make a change.
So I knew for me, it was almost that I didn't feel I had permission to go, I'm going to do something else, because I was earning more money than most of my friends, and still got good friends that hang out then, but now I've got more wealthy than I friends that I can aspire to and learn from on the wealth front of things. And so that changed the dynamic. And there was multiple things in my life where, again, it was just a plodding along. I was just going along. I was just planning on buying a house, and I was happy with a BMW 3 Series, obviously ridiculous car on the desk here that at some point kind of will be part of the podcast and the content that we put out on that front. But it almost felt like I needed someone to either one or two things: a mentor to give me a right kick in the ass and say, right, you can do whatever you want. If you're not happy here, you can do something else. And I was also in this weird comfort stage of, it wasn't that bad. All I had to do was get my head down. I wasn't falling out with people. No one was arguing with me, but it wasn't particularly fun. And I was earning enough money that it was worth doing, but it wasn't enough money that it was worth persevering with. And clearly in the world of entrepreneurship, and this as well, there's way more ups and downs than what even salespeople perhaps have. So this leads me to the next point here of, is this a point that whatever job that we get, even if we move, the audience here, they move from one sales job where they're like, okay, it's great, into one that's incredible, do we still then get to this point at some time in the future where we go, okay, this isn't the grass isn't as green as what I thought it was going to be on the other side? Or is it possible, if we get the right job, the right role, the right people around us, that we can be passionate for long periods of time, 4 decades in, for example, a sales role?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a big decision, right? We all have to make. And I've had to make them and still do, and many sales professionals do. And that's what I talk to audiences about. So this reminds me, Will, of one of the decision-making traps that I talk about to audiences, and more importantly, the solution. So let me answer your question by sharing this trap and the solution. So one of the 5 decision-making traps that I share with audiences that we all fall into is called the street gang trap. And I call it the street gang trap because, we think about the mean streets of where we live, which is a joke. Hopefully we don't live on mean streets, but they're bad influences. Okay. And so the bad influences that affect us in our decisions to take a job, leave a job, be a good leader or manager, are fear, ego, guilt, obligation, wanting to look good, wanting to impress. Those are the bad influences that will keep us in a job because, I got to, right? I'm, if you don't make a decision out of guilt or obligation or fear, right? If we make a decision out of fear, and it's not to say we're not fearful. I mean, I'm always afraid. Anyone tells you they're not afraid, they're a liar, right? But I try not to let fear control me. That's the big thing. You can't, it's okay to be fearful, but you can't let fear control you. So how do we break through those bad influences in our decisions that keep us from taking a job that's really satisfying or doing like that? Well, I call it the Fab Five. All right. And this is what you mentioned earlier about mentors or things like that. Tony Robbins, the big, tall personal development guru, his mentor, like the man that trained Tony Robbins, is a stalwart called Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn's long passed away, but Jim had a great saying that said, "We are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with." Okay, so think about it. Who do you spend your most time with? The 5 people you spend the most. And when people hear this, some people are going to say, "Listen, maybe I know 3 people, and I've got a lot of electronic friends and a dog or a fish or something like that." But I think it's really important, especially as successful professionals, you've got to protect who you surround around you, because those are the people that are going to push you to say, hey, Will, hey, Michael, you're doing that thing again. You're working till 10, or you're really pushing yourself. You're about to burn out. Having a strong core group of mentors or friends or people and other things that can help you grow. Likewise, Will, I've had to fire people out of my life, good friends that were energy vampires, right? When you stop taking somebody's text or someone calls and you don't want to return it, cutting those people out of your lives, getting the right people in your lives allows you then to see, hey, this job might not be the right. And you might not have, you might have the fear or the obligation, or we want to stay there and do a good job. And these other people can be the support structures you need to push you in the right directions, to give you the motivation, the inspiration, the tools and techniques to help you go. Without that, if you're an island of one, it's not a pleasant, that's where you become successfully miserable.
And does this then double down on the principle of integration, of you can have friends and family who can support you in your work life, and then you can have, I guess, work colleagues, if you've got a great team around you, who can perhaps help you not be stressed and a nutter in your personal life as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so great. So I really recommend people have Fab Fives for business decisions, personal decisions. So for example, I have some great business mentors and friends that are part of my Fab Five to help me with my business career that I might not ask about parenting advice, right? Or relationship advice or things like that. Likewise, I have 2 older sisters, Will. Like I have one sister that's a single mom also, and one sister that's been married for 18 years but no kids. And my 2 older sisters are great resources and part of my Fab Five for my personal life. I can go to my one sister for parenting advice, my other sister about how she's been in a happy marriage, but I wouldn't ask them about my business. They just don't have it. So yes, the Fab Five, those people around you help you integrate. So you have that work-life integration, because remember, if you have balance, that's okay, but you just put a little gram on one side and it could throw you off. So let's think about integrating it, and the people around you is really important for that integration.
What can we do? I want to come on to the flip side of this in a second, of how we can become higher performers with all this in the back of our mind. But one final thing on this, and that's fear. So I've only ever managed to make great breakthroughs in my career and as an entrepreneur and the podcast and all this kind of stuff when there's been just terrible things on one side of the equation, and so I've gone, see ya, and I've ran to the other. So 2 examples: my first sales job, or my first proper corporate sales role, when I was down south here in the UK, lived down south in the UK. My mum got ill with cancer, and so I said, see ya, moving back up north so I can spend more time up there. Left that job behind, and it was a great job, and I was having a great time, but it was the right move to make in hindsight. The second one was, as I said, with the podcast. There was a role doing well, good money, wasn't enjoying it. And I had to literally burn the bridges on that, set the ships on fire and make it so that I could, and never upset anyone or anything like that. But even just mentally, I could now probably, it'd be difficult to go back to just an office job. I could go and, do this podcast under the brand of under the umbrella of another brand, which is the goal of, have some huge corporate company come and buy the podcast and the audience, all this kind of stuff. But I couldn't work in an office ever again. So there's kind of multiple things, and it wasn't that I was brave, I took this leap and all this kind of stuff. It was something really crappy was on one side, and so I ran away from it in hopefully a positive direction. So are there any ways we can either null fear so that we can take action on it, or as kind of we chatted about just before we click record, is there anything like martial arts, or are there any training we can do to perhaps become more comfortable with fear, with anxiety, so that it's still there, but we can act in spite of it?
Yeah, two quick things. I'm going to talk about what I call the third place, because the third place is where we spend most of the time after our first two places, and for us that's at work and at work. For a lot of us, I know at work and at home are our first two places. The third place, Will, is where we go to learn a new skill, to not be the boss, to spend time with friends, to de-stress, to be present. And so having a viable third place, for some people, it might be the martial arts academy or the yoga studio or volunteering at church or taking a walk in nature. If people are spending most of their time at either work or at home and they don't have a third place where they're doing something for themselves, they're not going to create the space to see what you talked about, those two things, the cancer with your mom and then burning the bridge. I love that analogy. You said burning the bridge at that other location. When you said that, Will, it wasn't a should. Should I help my mom? Should I leave my job? Okay, I'm a cancer survivor, as you may or may not know. So when I had cancer, it's not that should I get better. I have to fucking get better, right? It's a must, right? Should I help my mom? No. You must. You're committed, man. When you burn those bridges at work, you can't go back. You're committed to that. So having a third place, a place where you can go and de-stress and declutter the mind and change your physical state, do something new. Try, get out of your comfort zone. We talked about doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a high pressure, high intensity situation where when I'm training, I don't worry about my upcoming keynote speech or did I return these phone calls or this, that, the other. I'm completely viscerally present. And during those moments are some of my highest creativity. I get new ideas that I can see that applies to my personal and professional life. So if I didn't have a third place, if I just worked and then ran home and took care of my 4-year-old and tried to be a personal relationship, I would never have the space to see the commitments that I'm missing, not the shoulds, but the things we must fucking do no matter what. And if you're committed at that level, where a should becomes a must, then you move heaven and earth. And then you find that integration. Then you overcome the fear. You still might be fearful, but the fear doesn't hold you back, or that ego doesn't hold you back from saying, I'm making all this money, but I'm secretly miserable and I won't tell anybody besides myself. So a third place, and if listeners don't have one, or if they have one that's insufficient, they've been going to the gym forever and it's time for a change. Do something new, try martial arts, or if you're like me and, don't dance that well, take a dance class, right? Something new that you're going to be like, whoa, this is crazy. And then you'd be really surprised. You're not thinking about the stress of work or your personal life. Then you might reflect and be like, yeah, these shoulds really need to become a must. And then things start to really change.
And just to touch on jiu-jitsu for a second here, and I've touched on it in the previous episodes of the show, because like anything you start doing that new that you enjoy, you bang on about it and you bore everyone brain dead around you. So I'm sure the audience have had probably enough of jiu-jitsu at this point, but there's two things that I took away from it, and there's two things that you literally mentioned then, so I thought we could touch on them. That is, one, ego. You suck. I've been doing it for 6 months. I'm still the worst person there by not a long margin, but by a decent margin. Especially, so I'm clearly white belt. If you're rolling with so rolling is competing, playing jiu-jitsu at the time. So when you're rolling with other individuals, especially anyone who's not a white belt, you can't win. it's nearly impossible. There is very likely anything that I can do with blue belt upwards. So blue belt's the next belt up from white. That it would just be fluke. So your only goal, or my only goal, typically is just to survive as long as possible before some dude in a dressing gown chokes me out, and obviously you tap before you go unconscious, hopefully. And that is incredibly humbling, right? That immediately diminishes your ego, because no matter how big and strong you are, no matter how you go to the gym and you're a powerlifter, you can hustle weights around, it doesn't translate to having a dude, or being a dude and having a skinny young girl on your back choking you, and there's nothing you can do about it still. It's incredible. The other element of this is the fear element of this. And again, I'm going to stop in a second. I don't want this to just turn into a jiu-jitsu advertisement. But the fear element of this, having just been doing this for 6 months now, a couple of times a week, not that many hours all in all, there's a remarkable difference between my ability to breathe and stay calm when said girl, skinny 15-year-old, is strangling you, versus the first few times I went, where immediately you're panicking, you're trying to throw people, you're just trying to muscle people off you. You physically can't throw someone off you because they're wrapped up on you, and there's nothing you can do. And so you're 2 seconds in, you're gassed, you're so tired. And now just the ability to go, okay, you can feel what's coming, you can start to predict where people are going to move, and you start just hunkering down, and you're protecting yourself. That is incredible on a fear front as well. Of, again, some of this perhaps translates to if you were attacked in the real world, or other things go on. And I've just took, as you mentioned, those 2 words of ego and fear, I took a lot away from just 6 months of jiu-jitsu. And there's probably, you can touch on this if there's other martial arts you feel would do a similar job, but martial arts, or even maybe just playing in a sports team and trying to be in a high level in that kind of game, on a team sport, anything like this is a perfect, I love this kind of third place way you described it. So I don't know if you've got anything to add as an expert in jiu-jitsu and other martial arts as well.
Well, I would say I'm dealing with the other end of that equation, Will. So I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and a relatively new one. I was promoted to black belt after 11 years of training. And my fear and ego is on the other level. It's like, oh my God, I'm a black belt now. I can't get dominated by a brown, a purple, a blue, heaven forbid, a big old athletic wrestling white belt. So I'm dealing with it on a different level. So I think it's going to be normal, right? No matter where we're doing that fear and ego that comes into play. I would say 2 things. It's so great, right? We're both getting out of our comfort zone. Yeah, if we stay within things that we know that don't push us or challenge us, there's no growth. And right, as human beings, if we're not growing, we're dying. So the thing I love about my third place, the Jiu-Jitsu Academy, is that I am never in my comfort zone. I am always learning something new. I'm always growing and being challenged to look at my fears and egos. So for listeners, if they don't have that in their life, if it's a third place you need to go to that will push you to grow, then I really encourage them to get that. But now, when we're there, right, and we're still growing and we're faced with fear and ego, we've got to be able to deal with it somehow. That's where other people come. Like you have a professor or a coach that helps you on the mats. And I do too. Even though I'm a black belt, I have my professor that gives me advice, tells me, hey, you keep going, motivates me, inspires me, tries to do different things. In our sales profession, in our business life and personal life, I also have a business coach, man. Like it would be irresponsible of me as a leader to not have someone else that's helping me. So again, that goes to my Fab Five. You have other people around you that you can go to that can help you push past your fear, that can help you push past your ego. So not only is it important to have a physical place to go to, but then again, you got to have those people around you that can mentor, coach, show you the way, someone that's been there before, and reflect back to you. Just even say, hey, Will, you're doing that thing again. You told me next time you do that to, I don't know, to throw a cup of water on you, stuff like that. But so that's what I do that works very well for me. And I know if I didn't have a professor or a coach in the martial arts academy, I couldn't self-study to where I am. And if I didn't have people, mentors, coaches to help me in my business and personal life, I may get to where I want to be, but it is a long, painful, unfun process. And maybe that's another thing I want to share with you guys. Like, if you're not having fun, like think of all the hours we spend doing our work. If you're not having fun, life's too doggone short. Add some fun to it. Maybe that's something that really can tell if you're passionate about what you're doing. If you got to slug in or force yourself, if it's not fun, take a close, hard look to see what's going on there.
And we'll just go slightly deeper on this before we go into, because this is something I've been pondering recently, before we go into the performance side of this. So I'm not religious. I'm an atheist. I genuinely believe that we just, the universe looking in on itself. Nature created us just as these blobs, and for some reason we've got this thing called consciousness that it's probably just a whole bunch of mathematical equations, and we overthink what we actually are. That's kind of my, in a nutshell, belief on things. And so, clearly, I don't believe there's a heaven or we go anywhere. So, the time we're spending, the time that we're recording here, the time that the audience are listening to this Sales Nation, it's gone. Can't get it back, right? And so, I believe that there's plenty of opportunities, like with the podcast here. I'm happy to invest into this because it's going to grow. It's going to help people. It's going to help me financially. It's going to help me become financially free in the not too distant future. And so, it was all worth it. Perhaps I would rather be on a beach surfing. Perhaps that would rather be more fun right now in the moment. But clearly, we're, as humans, are intelligent enough to be able to predict somewhat, maybe into the future enough to be able to invest into ourselves, invest into our mindset, business, sales skills, whatever it is. So with all that said, where's the balance here between, my belief and your belief might be different. The audience's belief will be hugely varied on this, but how do we contemplate whether we should be working in a sales role at all, or whether we should be a hippie smoking weed on a beach, having a fantastic time every day? No real worries about money because he doesn't need anything because he or her lives in a crappy little camper van. How do we balance all of this up when we put it into this bigger, deeper conversation of, perhaps this time that we're spending doing all this stuff doesn't come back to us?
That's a great question. Now, I think there's a quick answer, then a little explanation.
Okay.
If people are being really honest with themselves, they know what they need to be doing. What I mean by that, Will, is we all have those little dark corners in our mind where we don't want to look, where we know if I look over there, I would be out of this effing job in a heartbeat, or I would change, or I'd be out of this relationship, or I'd be on the beach smoking weed, or that. And the challenge is we know we need to look into those dark corners, and it doesn't mean that there's bad stuff in there. There's just stuff that we're avoiding. So are we in the right sales position? Or in sales management? I think it boils down to our needs. Again, what needs do you have that need to be fulfilled? Is it a need for money? Is it a need for connection? Is it a need for importance, to be recognized? Is it a need to serve? We all have these needs. And if you know you're out of alignment, right? Like if you know something's, we all feel it. Like we know there's a dark corner, I'm not looking at it. And it was what I had to look at, right? Like I had grown this wildly successful martial arts academy in Washington, D.C., the capital of America. I had some really impressive political and business clients, but I knew the dark corner I was avoiding was, I didn't like teaching anymore. I knew I needed to do something else. And I knew that, just like I would argue that you know it and all of our listeners know what they need to be doing. And it's that fear or that ego that prevents them from really taking a close look at that dark corner. And then more importantly, not taking action, but taking relevant action, right? Because we can say, aha, all right, I know I need to get out of this role and do another role. So the action I'm going to take is to, research, blah, blah, blah. No, maybe it's not the right action. You take relevant action. Okay, I'm going to schedule a meeting with my boss and, go create the new job. So I think that's it. People know what they want. You've got to look at those dark corners that we don't want to look at. And then even when you see what's in there, you've got to have the structures in place because willpower discipline only gets you so far. You've got to have other people that will push you and say, and help you get going where you need to get going. I mean, that's my experience, and that's how I've looked at it and how I see other successful people handling it.
Yeah, and Stephen Pressfield has a really good analogy in one of his books. Whether we call it analogy, I'm not sure, but he calls it like a phantom career. So it's a career alongside what you should be doing. So for me, I probably should always be an entrepreneur, and there's a huge proportion of entrepreneurship which is just selling. So being in B2B sales role set me up for doing what I'm doing now, and for helping the audience. If anyone else wants to start a side hustle, I'm always willing to kind of give people advice and help people on that front. But I probably should have been an entrepreneur straight out university, and I went into the sales role. And again, I learned a ton. It was a great experience. But my kind of phantom career was going alongside what my real career should have been. And to double down on this, I left the sales role when my mum was ill to move back up north. I moved from Olympus, who are a huge player in endoscopy throughout the world. I moved to the biggest competitor that owns 51% of the market share, called Storz. So I didn't really make any transition whatsoever. And it was almost like I knew there's a gut feeling like, right, I've got to make a change, I've got to do something different. My mum's the catalyst. That's almost the excuse here. That's okay, I've got a valid reason to leave, move somewhere else. And then I was just as miserable there. So just for the audience, Stephen Pressfield is well worth looking up. I'll put some links in the show notes to this episode as well of some of his work. But I think he calls it like a phantom career or something along the lines of that. And that really stuck with me when I first heard it. But Michael, to wrap up all this now, for people listening to this who they're going, I've got all this shit sorted. I've got my Fab Five at work, at home. I'm a brown belt at jiu-jitsu, so I don't have either the problems that we both have. I'm right in the middle of all this. Or a purple belt with 2 stripes, whatever the exact middle is. And they are they're doing well, but there's still a gap to high performance in sales. For someone who's got all the other stuff right, all the burnout side of things that we've discussed so far, what's the difference between, on an individual like that, what's the difference between a high performer and then someone who's really crushing it and excelling?
My experience has been the people that are really, really crushing it are some of the most generous, giving, charitable people on the planet. And what do I mean by that? They provide so much value to not only their clients, but to everyone around them that it's just ridiculous to be around them. They give their time, their energy, their focus. They give in a positive way, right? Like not in a way that saps them. But if we're so focused on what can I do to be successful, you're gonna be right here. You're never gonna really break through. But what can I do to give to others? And how can I serve? How can I add so much value to the people in my personal, professional lives? And if you're doing that, if you are giving and adding value at 10, 100x, like when I go to give a keynote speech, well, my fee is, 5 figures. At the bare minimum, I want to give 10x value. So the client that hired me, I'm done, and they have gotten at least 10x value. Many times 100x value. I've given that. I don't want to show up and say, give me all your referrals because I did such a great job. And that's what I've noticed that the really successful sales professionals have, that they're givers. And that could be from providing immense value. And they produce these raving fans that give them repeat business or referrals. You want to be around them, and it spirals, man. It grows and it takes on this life of its own, and it's amazing to behold. So, that's my words of wisdom that I hope, you have an experience with in the past, and that people can see value in that.
And final one on this, just to wrap things up here. For a sales professional, say, I don't know, the selling software, the selling SaaS software, whatever it is, something a whole chunk of the audience sell SaaS software at the moment, seemingly, because that's a lot of the emails that I get from them are about a lot of the companies that I deal with anyway. So they're selling this software. What does it look like practically for an individual like that, selling into huge corporations, for example, perhaps we're selling to Oracle, how does an individual give 10x, 100x value when we're just a measly, humble sales professional? How do we get people raving and excited about us as individuals?
Innovation. And let me explain a little bit about that. Okay. First of all, I caution everyone to stay away from the tyranny of how. All right, right. We want to get caught up in how do we do all this? What are you committed to? So sell it. You're selling this big, complicated process. If you're committed to whatever, closing the sale and getting 10 referrals, okay, what can you do? What can you innovate? Okay, so how can you? You work for a big company or you're doing your own thing, but there's always a way to make it memorable and innovative. And I'll give you an example, Will. As a keynote speaker, right? And if there's anyone who's been speaking or trying to break in, we all try to get into these top tier speaker bureaus because then we have sales agents pitching us. And these speaker bureaus are always getting bothered by speakers that are just starting out or not professional or, put me on your website, sell me. They're hearing it all the time. So when I was getting into the speaker bureaus, one of the innovative ways I did to get noticed and basically sell myself, because that's what I'm doing, and it's a complicated sales process, is I came up with the idea of there's a really big speaker bureau in Washington, D.C. that's like a top tier bureau. They have about 50 employees, including their management, the sales team, and all this. And food trucks are incredibly popular. And I got this really, really cool food truck. I talked to the one guy in charge. Speakers always trying to get in front of him and talk to him. I did something different. I did something innovative. I brought a food truck out, and it was like, it cost me like less than $500. All right, I'm willing to make a $500 investment to land a 5-figure speaking gig. I brought it out there. I was innovative. It was fun. I still got to get my foot in the door, pitch them on what I am. And it was different. They had told me in the 30 years they've been in existence, no speaker had ever done that. Now, speakers have brought them bad bagels and bad stale food, right? And they threw them in a conference room and bored them to death. But I was innovative, and I guarantee every sales professional can do the equivalent of what I just did. I lived in Japan for 10 years. So when I was going to another bureau, it was a much smaller one. The food truck wouldn't work. I had these really cool custom chopsticks made, these wooden chopsticks. And I with my brand being this Asian influence, we had bento boxes brought in. I had these really custom wooden chopsticks that says, make a good decision, book Michael today and blah, blah, blah. But it was innovative. It was different. And every sales professional can come up with their own innovative ideas to sell more, to give more, to get more referrals. So just think about it. Think outside the box, even if you're constrained, because I've been there. I worked for a Fortune 100, but I came up with my own innovative ideas to move it forward. And if you're getting stopped, that's where the Fab Five comes in. Brainstorm different ideas, make yourself stand out, add immense value, and the rest will take care of itself.
Perfect. Well, with that, Michael, I've got one final question I ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
Authenticity. Look at those dark corners a lot earlier, because I put off looking at some dark corners, 10, 15 years. So, I would give myself is, always be honest with yourself. We know as human beings if we're out of alignment. Look at those things. Surround yourself with positive people as soon as possible, mentors, people you want to learn from. And, I would have developed the Fab Five a lot earlier to help break through my ego, my fear.
And just to wrap up on this, when you say, look in dark corners, and we don't need to dive too into depth with it, but clearly you've been through some, bad times, obviously good times as well. But was that the catalyst to start looking at this? Or did that happen beforehand? Were you kind of well-rounded before? You mentioned cancer and things of that nature. What I'm getting at is, do people need a big moment in their life, a moment of clarity, or can they achieve some of this by going, right, I'm going to spend this weekend in a room with a notepad, sussing out what I'm good, bad at, what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing, where I want to be in 10 years? Do we need this big, good or bad moment of clarity to give us a kick in the ass? Or can this be done, by just the person listening right now?
It can and should be done by the person listening right now, because if we wait until that, holy shit moment, it's too late. And that's what happened with me. Cancer was a holy shit moment where I had to look at my life becoming, successfully miserable with my business. It reached a point where you're about to throw in the towel. Preferably we don't get there. So if there are periodic ways you can check in to look at the tough things. Am I happy with this career? Am I going the right place? Whatever that might be. I don't know, a meditation retreat for somebody, or, just a mind dump with your best friend. What I would encourage people is we can't do it by ourselves. You need other people. Listening to this podcast, Will, right? Like, this is so good. Like, feed your mind positive stuff. Like, we become what we ingest, whether it's food, what we listen to, watch. So listening to positive educational material like this, who knows? A listener might hear something today that causes them to make that change without having to go through a divorce or overeating or having a nervous breakdown. So unfortunately, it sometimes it does take a big thing, but hopefully we can head it off at the pass by having support structures to help us really look at our lives.
Good stuff. I appreciate you kind of being open and honest with us there. So Michael, with that, tell us a little bit about the book, and then you're clearly a killer keynote speaker. Tell us about that and where we can find out more about you.
Sure. So my book is called The Machine Way to Peak Performance, and it's 10 martial arts principles and how to apply those in business and life. So some of the lessons I shared here today are in the book. A lot of practical exercises to get people into action are in the book. And then as a keynote speaker, my website is the very tough to remember, michaelveltri.com, where I talk to sales professionals and manager meetings on how to make better decisions to be a better leader in business and life.
Well, I'll link to the book, the website, and everything else that we talked about in the show notes over at salesman.org. And with that, Michael, well, thank you for your time, mate. I really enjoyed this one, and for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
Thank you, Will. It was a pleasure.